When a baby comes into your world, most people are prepared for the sleepless nights and feeding challenges. But what almost no one prepares for is what happens to hormones after birth, for both parents. For women, the postpartum timeframe is one of the most dramatic hormonal shifts in human biology. And for men, the arrival of a baby triggers real, measurable hormonal changes that are almost never discussed. Today, we're talking about all of it. I'm Dr. Monica Minjeur, the host of Cycle Wisdom, where we help women and couples restore hormonal balance and reclaim their well-being through personalized healthcare grounded in clinical excellence. So let's start off with a story about a couple who I saw recently, and we'll call them Sarah and Matt. Now, they were first-time parents, and they were about 4 months postpartum by the time they found our office. They hadn't seen us prior, but a friend referred them to our clinic after Sarah mentioned that she was still suffering from significant exhaustion beyond just what sleep deprivation was explaining. She felt emotionally flat and disconnected from herself. Her husband, Matt, was also quietly struggling. He was trying to stay strong for Sarah, but he had low motivation and also found that he was irritable, had decreased libido, and struggled to keep up with his daily demands at work. Looking back, Sarah's 6-week follow-up with her OB appointment found nothing concerning and offered no explanation. She answered the postpartum depression questions in such a way that it didn't flag any concerns, and she was sent on her way. When she still didn't feel like herself a couple months later, that's when her friend sent her to our clinic. We started off with an evaluation of both partners. For Sarah in particular, we ordered blood work and identified that she actually had some postpartum thyroid problems. Her estrogen was still suppressed since she was breastfeeding, and her progesterone had not yet recovered. We started her on some supplemental progesterone and prescription-strength thyroid medication with the recommendation to follow up with her the next day to make sure that the progesterone had moved in the right direction. We also planned to recheck her thyroid levels about 4 to 6 weeks later and let her know that sometimes this might not be the only fix, but we might need to make some adjustments going forward. For Matt, we explained that oftentimes in the postpartum timeframe, men can have suppression of their DHEA and testosterone levels, in addition to an elevated prolactin. These are findings that almost never get tested and oftentimes aren't even discussed in new fathers. We started off talking with Matt about some lifestyle changes and started him on a DHEA supplement to help his low testosterone levels and plan to recheck his levels again in 1 month. The reality here is that neither Sarah nor Matt were broken, and what they were experiencing was real, measurable hormonal changes that had never been named. Now, not all couples deal with the actual hormonal drops, and there can be lots of other reasons why postpartum depression or anxiety can set in, but understanding what was going on with this couple helped them to make a clear plan for moving forward where their hormones were optimized and they had a better idea of how they needed to continue in order to be able to feel like they were giving the best of themselves to each other and to their new baby. So let's look at the big picture here. As I mentioned a bit ago, the postpartum period is one of the most hormonally intense times in a woman's entire life. And the standard 6-week follow-up barely scratches the surface. Now, most women that have been through this process typically realize that they get asked some questions at about 6 weeks postpartum, either at their own appointment or their baby's appointment. But most of the time, this questionnaire isn't brought up again, asked more about, and many women don't fully tell the truth because they're concerned about what happens next if I answer this wrong. Emerging research also shows us that new fathers can also experience significant hormonal shifts, changes that can impact bonding with the baby, mood, libido, and energy levels. These men are typically not screened at all. The reality here is that about 10% of men will experience clinical symptoms of postpartum depression and/or anxiety related to this time frame. Women, after delivering a baby, experience a dramatic drop of both progesterone and estrogen levels during the postpartum timeframe, making it feel like they go into instant menopause. It is the most dramatic swing of hormones being at a very high level during pregnancy, going down to nearly zero within the course of a couple of days. The other big factor here is that many women experience what's called postpartum thyroiditis, or inflammation of the thyroid gland itself. It is found to impact 5 to 10% of women and is significantly underdiagnosed. Symptoms are oftentimes chalked up to just being an exhausted new parent, and many women themselves don't identify that something else is going on other than just that exhaustion. When these changes go unaddressed, couples can struggle in isolation, oftentimes blaming themselves or each other, or sometimes even just the baby. Worse yet, many people go through thinking this is just normal to experience when you have some of those sleepless nights. And although, of course, exhaustion is going to play a role in what happens with your hormones and your mood and recovery, we want to make sure that you understand what is actually normal and what is beyond that normal. So, what are things that we want to watch for in that postpartum timeframe? Big things that are going to be different. It's not just the baby blues or feeling a little bit overwhelmed. The way I explain it in practice is this is more of a deep sadness or anxiety, or sometimes just emotions going up and down. This is typically going to be beyond your normal, I feel a little bit down, and oftentimes can border into things like, I don't want to get out of bed, or maybe I can't sleep at all. Things like, I hear the baby crying in the other room and they can fend for themselves. Or maybe this looks like, I just want to eat all the time, or I don't feel like eating at all. When you have those physical symptoms that are adding to things, that's when we want to evaluate further. Those things are not normal, not the normal pathway that you would normally care for yourself. And so when we see this, we oftentimes are thinking about that estrogen and progesterone drop. And this drop is a good thing in that it triggers milk production, but it also creates profound hormonal vulnerability. We want to make sure that you are addressing these symptoms as they arise and not just waiting for that conventional screen that happens at 6 weeks, because many women experience those changes within the first couple of days postpartum, and in some, it can last well beyond that first few months. In fact, for many women, symptoms don't continue to improve significantly until their cycle comes back, which can be quite some time, especially if she is breastfeeding or pumping. So the other big hormone that plays a role with that is going to be prolactin. Now, prolactin suppresses estrogen, and this is physiologically normal. Our bodies have an increase of prolactin, which then blocks estrogen and decreases ovulation. This is impactful for mom from a standpoint of helping to space out ovulation, space out a return of the menstrual cycles, and space out pregnancies. But with that prolonged suppression of estrogen, we can have all of the similar effects as what many women would experience during menopause. So things like vaginal dryness, decreased libido, dysfunction of the pelvic floor, as we discussed last week, mood instability, bone density changes, and really the duration of how long that estrogen is suppressed correlates with breastfeeding frequency and if there's anything else going on to feed baby. So for example, a mom who is exclusively breastfeeding and doing that around the clock every couple of hours is more likely to have that ongoing estrogen suppression because the prolactin is remaining elevated. Now, explaining to women that this is temporary and manageable and normal is oftentimes therapeutic in and of itself, but it's not the whole picture. And in some cases, we find that women need a lot more than just talk therapy. So I want to talk just briefly on some treatment options here, and these aren't necessarily recommended across the board, but they are options that oftentimes women don't know about. So one of the most common treatments we utilize in our practice for the treatment of postpartum depression or postpartum anxiety is actually a single dose of bioidentical progesterone. Now, this can be given either just as a single 200 milligram tablet or as an injectable medication of the progesterone. But the original studies done on this showed that 80% of women felt about 80% better within 24 hours. And again, if we think about this physiologically, the significant drop in progesterone is what makes women feel so tough. And so if we can increase that progesterone level, even if it's temporarily, oftentimes that can give some relief, improve sleep quality for that evening that they take it. And in many times, progesterone is found to be a very calming hormone. And so being able to take the edge off of any anxiety or irritability can make a huge difference. So this is always the mechanism that we try to treat first, is by giving a single dose of progesterone. There are other medications that can be useful as well. One of those newer medications out there is called zuranolone. Now, this is a newer FDA-approved oral medication, so a pill that you would take by mouth, and it's designed to modulate or to change GABA signaling. Now, GABA receptors have to do with what's going on at the neurotransmitter level of your brain, and zuranolone has been FDA approved to treat postpartum depression. Now, this medication is much more expensive and it is a bit newer, but it does seem to show pretty good efficacy as far as the treatment of postpartum depression. And finally, we can still always use our standard antidepressant or anti-anxiety medications. However, these do take a bit longer to work and in many cases can take up to 4 to 6 weeks before we notice full efficacy. And additionally, they come with potential increased side effects as far as decreased libido, weight gain, and other longer-term dependency on them. And so usually I try to avoid these medications where possible, but they certainly do still have their place if the progesterone or the zuranolone don't work. Now, another big thing to pay attention to, as we have mentioned, is that postpartum thyroid dysfunction. And again, in about 5 to 10% of women, we find that the immune system actually attacks the thyroid. And so it can create this up and down feeling of the thyroid where initially many women feel like their thyroid is overactive. And so this can lead to things like heart palpitations or anxiety or jitteriness. And then it's oftentimes followed by a low thyroid symptoms. So things like constipation, depression, weight gain, additional hair loss. And these symptoms oftentimes overlap a lot with that new parent exhaustion, and most women are never screened for it. The other interesting factor is that many women who have had thyroid dysfunction in the past, or maybe it was subclinical or undiagnosed thyroid problems in the past, oftentimes this can get worse or more exacerbated in that postpartum timeframe. So if you are feeling significant fatigue, exhaustion, brain fog, other symptoms that have an overlap with thyroid, we always would want to screen you for that thyroid dysfunction by checking your labs. Because if we don't treat thyroid dysfunction, it can significantly prolong your recovery and is associated with ongoing postpartum depression. Unfortunately, routine postpartum thyroid screening is not a current standard of care, but anytime we have a woman or a man that comes in with these symptoms, we always want to be thinking about what else could be causing it if it's not just the standard, I'm tired, I'm up overnight. So let's switch gears a little bit and look at what happens to men's hormones in the postpartum timeframe, as well as what can we do about it. So approximately 1 out of 10 dads experience a significant testosterone decline in dads. Now, we know that all men experience at least some degree of decline in their testosterone after a baby comes into the home. But for 10% of men, that can be really significant. The more hands-on caregiving they're doing, the more sleep disturbances they have, the more profound the drop is. And actually, there was a fascinating study done back in 2011 that found men that were compared to single men and had fathers with children older than 1 month old. Brand new dads had 4 to 5 times lower testosterone levels than the single men. And levels were twice as low as dads with babies that were aged 1 month to 1 year. So the good news here is that levels do seem to rebound as that baby gets a little bit older. But in that first month, think about that. 4 to 5 times lower testosterone. I mean, that's significant. This can add to fatigue, decreased libido, hair loss, and feeling like your muscles are wasting away. The other hormone that's playing a role with dads is prolactin. So yes, the same prolactin that normally would increase in mom to help promote and support breastfeeding and lactation, prolactin rises in fathers who are spending a lot of time closely bonded with their babies. Prolactin promotes nurturing behavior, but again, also can contribute to that fatigue and decreased libido. Now, these changes are there biologically on purpose, but it can manifest as symptoms that can feel alarming if you don't know that that's what's going on. Signs or symptoms that we talk to dads about watching out for include anger, sudden outbursts or violent behavior, increase in risk-taking behavior, so things like turning to substances or alcohol or prescription drugs, physical symptoms such as muscle aches, headaches, stomach aches, digestion issues, or things like general depression or anxiety-related symptoms, things like poor concentration, suicidal thoughts, withdrawing from relationships, working a lot more, a lot less, sleeping a lot more or a lot less, changes in their motivation or appetite. And unfortunately, men rarely seek evaluation or support. Oftentimes, they're quietly suffering while they're trying to focus on supporting their partner. And so for treatment for men, first and foremost, we focus on normalizing the fact that, yes, this happens. Hormones can drop and can change. And in some cases, we will say it's appropriate to actually check those lab levels. So looking for things like, what is the testosterone doing? What is your vitamin D? What's going on with your adrenals? And then supporting those things with supplements or prescription medications when needed. We also talk a lot about the importance of trying to get regular sleep and regular exercise. Exercise especially helps to promote building and boosting testosterone levels in guys. And so we talk a lot about trying to get out and do some strength training, lifting weights, chopping wood, doing some exercise that really gets your heart pumping, because all of these things can help to boost those testosterone levels again. Most importantly, couples need to understand that postpartum depression or anxiety does not just need to be a way of life. If you are struggling, please ask for standard lab testing. Have them look for a thyroid screen, look at your nutritional assessment, and if appropriate, check your hormone levels. If you're a guy, ask for checking levels of prolactin, testosterone, estrogen. If you're a woman, ask for checking your estrogen, prolactin, progesterone. All of these things can be fixed, can be adjusted, and can be supported even in the postpartum timeframe. We always are going to talk about prioritizing sleep. Now, sometimes that's not possible if you've got a baby who has their sleep schedule flipped, but this is where we recommend find somebody who can come in and help you out overnight. Do you have a family member? Do you have a friend? Do you have somebody that can allow you to get at least a few hours of uninterrupted sleep? We also pay special attention to making sure that nutritional repletion is a part of the story for both partners. Especially if we've got a mom who is breastfeeding or pumping, we need to make sure that she's keeping up with the caloric demands that are necessary to be able to support not only baby's breast milk, but also her own health. And most importantly, realizing that this is something that is not just in your head. Conventional postpartum care often focuses just on mom's recovery and infant health. In our world, we always are going to be looking at both partners' hormonal, nutritional, and emotional needs throughout this transition timeframe. Now, one of the most common questions we get asked is, well, how long does it take for my hormones to get back to normal postpartum? And unfortunately, this is really variable, so it's hard to answer. For many women that are still breastfeeding, that estrogen suppression continues as long as the prolactin levels are elevated. Now, many women will see a significant improvement in their symptoms once they start weaning, or sometimes as breastfeeding frequency decreases, or sometimes even just when the menstrual cycle returns. But thyroid and nutritional issues need to be evaluated and addressed directly. This is not going to just magically improve once the cycles come back. And again, it's why we talk about the fact that although this is most common in the first couple of months postpartum, it can impact women and couples all the way through the first year postpartum and sometimes longer in certain individuals. The other question we often get asked is, can postpartum hormones be contributing to anxiety? I oftentimes hear about it causing depression, but is anxiety playing a role at all? And the answer here is absolutely. Both low estrogen and progesterone impact neurotransmitter function. So things like GABA, serotonin, and dopamine regulation, those are all influenced by your hormones. Postpartum anxiety is not purely psychological. It has real hormonal drivers that can be identified and treated if that's causing a problem. And as I mentioned, one of the most common treatments we utilize in our practice is going to be that bioidentical progesterone. Again, it tends to have a very calming effect, But if we are also helping to boost those progesterone levels, we can also make a positive impact on those neurotransmitters. And finally, when can we start thinking about trying for another pregnancy? Many times women are scared after dealing with postpartum depression or anxiety. They don't know, am I going to deal with this again? What does it look like for my recovery? When is it best to start even thinking about this? And there's no set calendar date for most women that seems to make sense across the board. Ideally, we focus on restoring and recovering your hormones and your nutritional status, but oftentimes recommend a postpartum evaluation of your labs prior to trying to conceive so that we can check and assess and make sure that your hormones are at their optimal going into your next pregnancy. Imagine if postpartum care extended well beyond just a 6-week physical check. If it involved a real conversation about the hormonal changes of new parenthood for both partners. Imagine if new mothers weren't left wondering whether their exhaustion and emotional flatness was just the cost of motherhood, and instead were given evaluation, answers, and a path forward. Imagine if new fathers were told what they were experiencing was real and worth addressing, and even better, could be corrected and supported if they have appropriate hormones checked. Imagine if couples moved through the postpartum timeframe with more understanding, more support, so that when they were ready to grow their family again, they were doing so from a place of genuine recovery and health, poised to improve health and promote fertility. If you're ready to work with our elite team of healthcare professionals, go to our website, radiantclinic.com, to schedule a free discovery call and learn more about our package-based pricing for comprehensive care. We are currently able to see people for in-person appointments in our Cedar Rapids, Iowa clinic, or can arrange for a telehealth visit if you live in many different states across the U.S. Check out our website for current states that we can serve medical clients, and let us know if your state is not listed to see if we can still cover you there, as we are constantly expanding our reach. Please note that our fertility educators are able to take care of clients no matter where they live. Thank you so much for listening to this episode. Please share this podcast with someone in your life who would benefit from our services. Remember to subscribe to this podcast for more empowering content that I look forward to sharing with you on our next episode of Cycle Wisdom.